Good afternoon all, we'll make a start. Right, we are up to item 9, the Main Street Cycleway Permanent Solution, and this presentation is being done. If you bear with me, we've got a change from Hamish Fettenby, who's not here. We have Chris Lai and Bryce Hosking presenting, I believe. Just Chris.
Good afternoon, Council. I believe Bryce is just upstairs. He'll be down on his way very shortly.
You want us to wait, or?
Probably happy to proceed and
Okay.
try and attempt it myself. But yeah, I take the report as read. I do want to just point out there is a little bit of a mistake in the recommendation to Council. We were referenced retain the existing Pioneer Highway shared path is actually refers to retaining the temporary cycleway that has been installed between Pitt Street and West Street, and then the pieces, and then to progress the remaining pieces as a permanent solution to complete a safe cycleway is probably in reference to the shared path between the West Street and the Longbird shared path, as well as a pedestrian cycle crossing at Burns Avenue. I'm happy to take questions.
Do you want to add anything, Bryce, or shall we take questions?
I'll take what Chris said is accurate and take questions.
All right, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chris and Bryce. A couple of questions. One is about the existing temporary infrastructure on the cycleway. I see in the report that the estimate for upkeep of that is $5,000 a year. But I noted on my way in this morning that even just on one side of the road, there are 21 posts missing from that temporary cycleway at the moment. So if we were to retain it, is $5,000 a year a realistic figure for upkeep, maintenance?
It might be a little light. It might need to be slightly higher depending on the level of, I guess, how people are removing the bollards essentially. But 5 would probably be a low estimate at this stage.
Sorry, what was that last thing?
I'd assume 5 is a low estimate to maintain it.
Yeah, just to add to that, look, I mean, ultimately it's an unknown quantity of how many of those might get knocked over or removed or whatever it is. So it's based on the data that we had leading into this period, and that's where the 5,000 was created. Obviously, if damage to them or they end up going walkabouts a lot more than that, then it could be more than $5,000 is needed, and I guess that's where the uncertainty comes.
How often are we replacing them if they're removed? Or like how regularly are we needing to replace them?
Up until this point, I understand it's just been sort of as required, I guess on a sort of sporadic note, but obviously moving forward, if this is the solution we stick with, we'll be looking to put a much more regimented sort of review process. So as one of them disappears or breaks, we can look to replace it in a much more timely manner rather than letting it get to the point it is currently.
Okay, thank you. My other question is around what a permanent solution is proposed to look like. So there's a picture in the paper of just a concrete curb, which might be, I don't know, 5 centimetres high, I don't know, something like that, but no separators. So is the permanent solution that's proposed going to be a low concrete curb with no separators? No bollards, do you know what I mean, to give the separation height?
That would be the most basic concept of a separated cycleway. We can add vertical elements to it, such as bollards on top of the concrete separator to give that height visibility. It's something that we haven't fully designed yet or looked into or engaged with, but that, yes, we can add additional elements.
Okay, because my understanding of some of the dissatisfaction with the planter boxes was to do with the height of them, that drivers felt that they couldn't when they were driving, the ones that were close to them, they couldn't really see. And I feel that that would be even more of an issue with a low concrete curb with no vertical bollards.
Well, I might start off this answer, and then Chris can provide some technical knowledge if required. Whenever, not necessarily this strip, but whenever we are looking at the separated cycleways, there's, I guess, a number of complexities that come into it. For instance, things like rubbish collection. So if we're looking to do it on residential streets, how will our collections trucks or some of the private ones, such as Waste Management, actually pick up the bins, and how will that actually look like? So that's just one example of, there's a number of things that need to be fed in, and any design that we do would need to be looking to strike the best balance between those. If I'm taking what Chris had said earlier, I think it's fair to say that the example shown is purely an example. That's not necessarily what the final design will look like. And I would think we would have to actually design it for what it is and where it is, and consider all those things before any final solution was actually provided.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So just to move on to the missing piece then, as we'll call it. So the bit between the end of, Botanical Road and West Street Shops, effectively. Is the plan to have cyclists that are cycling out of town cross the road at that point onto the other side of the carriageway and be on a shared pathway, if you like, on the right-hand side? And if so, when they're coming into town, would they still be able to carry on straight? So we'd still have two cycleways on the bit from West Street to Pitt Street, or would they then have to cross the road again and would be going in both directions on the way into town? Sorry if that's not a clear question.
I think that's quite clear. So the shared path would be on the north side of Pioneer Highway between Botanical and Burns, so opposite the shops.
Yeah.
If you're going from the city towards Longburn, from Pitt Street, you'd be in the separated cycleway, and then you'd cross roughly where the shops are, and then you'd head west towards Longburn. Mm-hmm. On the opposite, if you're going towards the city, you'd be on the shared path, and then basically you would continue onto the road. There'll be a transition onto the road on the same side of the road towards.
Right, okay, thank you for explaining that. Would there be, is a cycle crossing or a cycle light sort of thing, obviously that's planned for the Burns Road crossing. Is it also planned for the Botanical Road crossing?
We haven't planned anything for the Botanical Road crossing. We'd be expecting, at this stage, it would be cyclists would be crossing with pedestrians at the existing lights. I guess there's a wider conversation about what do we do with that particular intersection, because it has been flagged to us by Wakatahi that it's there are some safety issues with the current usage, and that's not just in terms of pedestrians and cyclists, it's also in terms of traffic as well. So it might need its own wider project, a bigger project, which comes with its own particular budget.
Okay, because if you were needing to cross that on Botanical Road, on the cycleway, as it were, you'd have to cross three, different sections of road, because there's feeder lanes, in both directions. So I guess if nothing is planned for that bit, at what stage would we be able to have a discussion about plans for that?
I would say those kind of considerations can be part of the LTP, and you can actually look at a more greater investigation program to start looking at how we could best solve that problem, and that was probably a good place to start as part of, I guess, to actually look at all the options and come up with, I guess, some options for council to consider, and then ultimately decide what the best option is, and then we can actually look to do the physical work.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a very minor question, I think, in the scheme of a sensible recommendation. But one of the issues we've been seeing is people parking in the in the temporary cycleway? And the answer that I've had when I've asked about that is that we can't enforce parking restrictions because of the temporary nature. So I want to be clear that this solves that, and I couldn't figure that out from the report.
It's not particularly mentioned in the report, but what we would be looking to do as part of the permanent solution is get broken yellow lines put down as a parking restriction to prevent parking to be able to occur within the cycleway, the separate cycleway. That's probably something for my team to engage with them. That'll be something we'll be looking to do, I guess, after this meeting.
So that is part of the plan.
That would be part of the
work.
plan to
Excellent.
reinforce the cycleway.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just have a question around the budget, the finances. Under option 1 on page 202, it's got a figure of 250,000 to complete the route under the financials. But then on 206, under the 4.2, capital renewal new, on that second paragraph, it says that the shared pathway section requires approximately 350,000. And then the next paragraph talks about 300 for a crossing. But I just can't seem to figure out where the 750 comes from.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's another typo in the report. So we actually estimate the shared path component to be up to 350,000, and then the cycle crossing to be 300. So in total, it should be 650 for
And so so the error is on the 202 in the financials, so it should be 650.
I'm sorry, I'm not too sure where the 202 is. Oh, sorry,
Sorry, page 202.
So we'll be 650, not 750.
Okay, and all of that has been budgeted for?
yes, we have that
Is
in
it?
existing programs.
Existing programs. Okay, thank you.
Councillor McCullough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, guys, for the report. Just had a few, one or two questions. And the first one is pretty much in line with Councillor Johnson's first question around the height or probably the width of the concrete separators. And one of the things that I also noticed is that on page 204, figure 3.3, in areas where let's say the cycle lane is narrow, which can prove to be very challenging for cyclists. Have there been other measures or other options considered? For example, like grade separations, for example, or landscape medians considered as part of options?
Things like landscape medians have been considered in the past. I guess they will require a wider width as a separator. I guess that then it becomes a challenge of balancing the existing road space, which might mean potentially removal of parking or of a traffic lane to accommodate that. The other operational issue with having it as gardens is there's higher requirements around traffic management, around works on roads or maintaining the gardens, so that will come with higher operational costs as well. That's something that can be considered, but we probably want to consider that through the budget process as well.
And can I please ask also your professional advice on what a pedestrian safety island would look like or the cost of it?
So any island or anything like that, I guess it comes back to my earlier response to Councillor Johnson, is we would have to, as part of the design process, we'll consider what that looks like in order to determine the best overall solution.
Cool. Last question, Chair. I'm not a civil engineer or a planning expert, but I think my concern with concrete separators, that the length of them, because you've mentioned somewhere in your report that posts that are currently sitting there or that have been installed or that are currently sitting there have been occasionally damaged. And how are those, if we're to go with concrete separators, in terms of the safety aspect of it, we can also see that vehicles are likely to also potentially run over to the other side. Because currently you've mentioned that posts currently are being damaged, occasionally damaged by motorists and that sort of thing. How safe are concrete separators as an option?
It really depends on how we shape the islands. If we make the island somewhat mountable, then it becomes less of a direct impact force to the vehicles. So vehicles can go over it a little bit, but then obviously there's other, potential risks as well to users.
Just to build on that, I suppose this is a good way to look at this is it's all about reducing risk. So there's always a risk that, if someone's driving flat tacketed and they go over it, well, that's always a risk. And so really it's just about trying to mitigate the risk and make it as safe as possible for the cycling community as possible, really. But there will always be a risk of someone, even if we put a barrier there, there's always a risk of someone going through a barrier. I mean, that risk never goes away. It's just about lowering it to as an acceptable level as possible.
Cool. No, thank you.
Thank you. I might just ask a few key questions here, if you don't mind. So if we refer to page 205, we can see the section of cycle lane that's proposed to be turned into a shared pathway. That's on page 205. Correct me if I'm wrong, that cycleway currently goes all the way down to Botanical Road and carries on along Pioneer. So,
Correct.
So we would effectively defunct that cycleway and turn it back into regular road if we were to move into a shared pathway off the road. Is that correct?
That's correct. So whatever's there now would probably go back to parking, if anything. Yeah.
Okay. What, data or evidence we're basing the need for a new pedestrian/cycle crossing outside the shops there off? Have we done some analysis of near misses or accidents that have happened in that space?
Not in particular for pedestrians crossing, but I guess it's just recognising that we need to somehow transition the cycleway to connect to the shared path safely. And because it's a multi-lane road, we would need some sort of controls to facilitate that. I guess we've already had concerns that, about crossing multi-lane roads in the past, and yet this is a 50k road with high speeds and volumes.
Thank you. And my final question is on page 200. It says that the cycle count showed that user numbers almost tripled within the first month of operation. I was just wondering what the actual figures were to that, because tripled could be 2 people to 6, or it could be 2,000 people to 6,000. I'm sorry, I wouldn't have seen the report at the time.
I'm not privy to the original numbers that was presented,
Okay.
but I have done recent cycle counts. So back in August 22, we did a tube counts for cyclists on the Cypress Cycleway, and it was averaging 60 movements a day for cyclists.
60 movements a day. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, you're back in.
I was just going to offer to move the recommendation.
Councillor Dennison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to inquire around alternate options that you've explored, like when it costs $60,000 for the treatment to get up towards the shops, is the $40,000 that's mentioned in 4.2, I was just wanting to know what the distance would be just to carry that treatment up to Botanical Road and then cross over at the existing crossing and then maintain the shared path from that point. I want to understand some of the other options you've explored, and if it was $60,000 to get us with that treatment to where we are now, it'd be, I'm just guessing, possibly $40,000 for a solution to get us up to Botanical Road with that current treatment.
So I guess the 60,000 was just the materials, and then 40,000 for the labour to install. I believe that's what it's saying. So
okay.
100,000 total. I guess the trade-off with carrying it fully to Botanical Road is we will have to remove parking on both sides of the road. which wasn't part of the original Innovating Streets project. There will probably need to be a level of engagement with those affected parties. The problem we also have is then if we're going to get them, if you're heading towards Longburn, how do we get them across to the Pioneer Highway, the Longburn shed path? So that might, there's thoughts of a diagonal crossing at Botanical Road, but then we'll have to consider quite big upgrades to the intersection to make that work, I think.
You think? Because there is a pedestrian crossing there. Could they not have some signage or some queuing to go across on the actual pedestrian crossing like you would need to anyway, crossing Botanical Road? How is that different?
The way I'd see it working is you'd have to transition cyclists onto the footpath prior to the lights, because unless you remove the left turn bay down Botanical Road. And then for cyclists, they'll need to cross 2 sets of lights to get onto the Longburn shared path. So it won't be a direct, I guess it's a lower level of service, and we're unsure whether that's a good outcome for a prioritised cycling route.
Okay. And just another question. So that 60 movements that you assessed back in August, how different was that from the April report with some of the numbers that seemed like there wasn't any current numbers even to suggest in that April report last year that come to council around that sort of volume?
Perhaps after this report, we will circulate the numbers, and we can also provide a comparison of what they were previously and what they are now for councillors' information. Might be the easiest way rather than speculating on actual traffic numbers in this forum.
Okay, but do you mind me just delving down to understand, was that 60 movements each way, or was that in total? Or like, is there only 30 going back out?
That was in total, so 30 in each direction on average.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to tease out a bit more about the build-up of concrete barriers with the posts. What sort of height, on page 202, what sort of height is that concrete at the moment? Just roughly ballpark.
Ideally, it should be around the standard curb and channel height, around 100 to 150
So
mil.
can you tell me what height the planter boxes used to be?
They're about 400 mil.
400. Okay, because I recall it. I don't think it really matters the point you've made about people just can't drive, because we've seen a number of photos of cars parked on top of planter boxes. So I don't think, unless we go a full concrete barrier at a reasonable height, that's going to alter things. I'll leave the rest to comment. Thank you.
Yeah, all right, thank you, Councillor Meehan. All right, that has expended our list of questions, so thank you, officers. I'll let you return to your seats. Councillor Johnson has indicated she wants to put forward option 1, which is to A, keep the infrastructure that is already there until it reaches the end of its useful life and then replace it, and B, construct the remaining pieces as a permanent solution to create a complete and safe cycleway along that route. Do you have a seconder, Councillor Johnson? Councillor McCullough. Right. Councillor Johnson, the floor is yours if you want it.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very keen to see us finish this cycleway, and I think what we need to be clear about at the moment is that it's not a complete cycleway as it is. And as I think I made the point the other day, it's very difficult to talk about the benefits and the numbers of people that are taking up cycling if you're not providing a complete route. So until we complete this, I think any discussion about numbers is a bit of a moot point. In terms of getting people across the road at West Street, the cycle lane, and that all it is at the moment is paint on the road, the cycle lane from West Street to the Botanical Road lights is extremely narrow. Parking is allowed on the road, and if you're a cyclist, there really is no room to ride up that cycleway at that point. So there's no way that we can create a cycleway on the going out of town side of Pioneer Highway without impinging on one of the lanes of traffic. Whereas if you look at the north side, there's a very wide berm there, because I think that's probably where the railway used to run. And that wide berm would be able to accommodate a shared pathway to extend from the Longburn shared pathway. So it seems to me to be only common sense to use the space that isn't contested, which is that large berm, and not to try and squeeze a cycleway on the south side of Pioneer Highway. And in terms of the temporary cycleway infrastructure, it seems to me that now that it's there and it's doing a reasonable job, we might as well get maximum benefit from it rather than removing it and replacing it with something else. And I do have some concerns, I think, as others have mentioned, about just a concrete lip without anything on top of it in terms of its visibility to motorists. So I think the current temporary cycleway infrastructure is working really well, apart from it does need a bit of maintenance. But even so, in terms of value for money, we'd be better to let that carry on for as long as it lasts. We will still have an issue with getting people across Botanical Road. And currently, that is not an easy thing to do. And at the moment, what you do as a cyclist is you go onto the roadway and become sort of a vehicle and go across that way. But if we're intending for people to stay on the shared pathway, I think it will be, we will need to look carefully at how we make that crossing safer. The whole idea of these cycleways is that people feel safe on them, and therefore they're inclined to take up cycling where they wouldn't have done otherwise. And so I think it's in our interest to make sure that the infrastructure that we put in place is not only safe but perceived to be safe, so that cycling is encouraged. And I also just want to remind you that when we discussed Ferguson Street and whether or not we would have any cycle routes coming along Ferguson Street, we were told that no, Main Street is meant to be the prioritised cycle route into town. And so if this is the route that we're prioritising as our cycle route into town from the Awapuni Highbury side of town, then it needs to be done adequately so that people do feel safe to use it. So I would encourage you to support this, and it's been a long road, if you'll pardon the pun, to get this far, but I think it's important that we see it finished and joined up. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This project has certainly had a bit of public attention, and what I've been disappointed in is around the compelling proposition around the growth of cyclists and the number identified that the investment we put in. So I have no problem that they're going to grow, but when we've already had it in place with the trial for over a year, and even since the report last April, almost another year on with the new implementation, we're getting 30 cyclists each way per day. And if you times that over, they might be peaked, there might be some 9 o'clock cyclists and nothing for the balance until the afternoon, late afternoon. And so the size of investment that we're looking at to foot the bill on the balance of this at 650, I just have a real concern about, because there's no information to make that call on apart from 30 cyclists each way. In my questions, I would suggest that with the planter boxes that did go up to Botanical Road, that there is a crossing at Botanical Road that goes both across Main Street, Pioneer Highway, and across Botanical Road. So as Councillor Johnston did mention, we still have the issue across Botanical Road, which seems to me that it works reasonably well. So therefore I kind of wonder myself, why can't we use the cycle crossing at Botanical Road across Pioneer Highway 2 and save the 300,000 for an extra crossing down at the Pioneer Highway shops? So we have had a complete pathway up to Botanical Road with the planter boxes, so I don't know where we've had the issue around the parking outside those residencies between the shops and Botanical Road. So that's one I'd like to have more information on. And so therefore, when I'm looking at the recommendations, there's two things within it. I'm happy to retain the existing infrastructure, but the words in the current recommendation says, and replace it, which seemed odd. So we're going to reach the end of its useful life and replace it. So I just rather have that it's at the end of its useful life. And what I'd be wanting to ask Mr. Chair is to move this recommendation in two parts, where we can support the current infrastructure, and then if others want to replace it and progress it, remaining with the balance of the wording, support that further investment. But I'm not prepared to support it in that way. But I'm happy with the first part of it. So what I'm suggesting is that we move that into two recommendations. And make it very clear that I'm against spending the sizes of sums that we're looking for that new pathway and crossing. Thank you.
So on advice from officers, the way we would have to go about splitting that, given it's been moved in one piece by the mover and seconder, is the mover and seconder would have to agree to split it into two and then take it as two separate votes, which, or alternatively, we would fail this and put forward option 2. And, yeah.
Well, that may be the way we need to do it, and I'll give notice in that line. Thank you.
All right. I might take this opportunity to speak to it myself. Be clear, I intended on putting forward option 2 as our proposal today, and if this fails, I will be putting forward option 2. What Councillor Johnson has described is a very standard cycleway that is used across New Zealand, painted lines on a road that goes all the way down Main Street, all the way down Pioneer Highway. So this is a very standard set of cycleways that we have currently there. Where we see those big increases in cycle usage is where we go from having no cycleway and therefore no safe way to travel down that road to having a cycleway, and that's where we see the big uptick in usage because of the uptick in safety. What we have at the moment is a complete and functioning cycleway that we are looking to replace with an alternative route, effectively, which will add a single crossing needed across Pioneer at the shops, and then another crossing across Botanical to carry on a shared route. So to me, what we're doing is in an ideal world, it would be nice if we added a shared pathway along there, but at the moment, we have a number of routes that don't even have a single cycleway. They don't even have a single safe way to get through them, and we're looking at replacing one that already does have that, on top of, already functioning infrastructure. There doesn't seem to have been any analysis done along the safety of crossing that main road. You can almost see my house in the photo. I lived on Burns Avenue for many years. I've crossed that road hundreds of times, and I have never seen a near miss. I have never seen anything of that nature. Now, it's not to say that that's never happened, but as can happen on any road, if people cross unsafely without checking, there is risk, and we cannot ever eliminate that completely, but there is already a pedestrian refuge in the middle of that road, and under the current cycleways, you don't need it because you can carry on your lane all the way down to the end, across Botanical Road and through to Pioneer Highway. I just believe there are other routes, if we are going to spend this money on cycleways, there are other routes that would greatly benefit from it, where we won't see the uptick in this route because we already have a functioning cycleway. So to see that we had a near tripling, which might have taken us from 24 people to 60 people over the course of 2 years from adding the infrastructure we've added, I don't feel that is a compelling increase in usage to justify the level of investment that we are considering making in this. So my plea to you would be, we have a functioning cycleway there. Yes, it could be better, but it is currently good, and it goes across the road and it functions. So if we're going to spend this money, let's spend it somewhere it could be better used for the safety of our community. So I'll be voting against this and putting forward option 2 if it fails. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It has been an interesting set of questions, answers, and comments so far. My personal view on this is that it is quite an elegant solution that the officers have brought to us to something that has proved tricky. You know, it would have been nice to just have cycleways on both sides going out to right to Botanical, given the shops and the concerns around access there. That wasn't really politically viable, so they've come back to us with something that still connects things up, which is the essential thing here, is making those connections. Unlike the chair, my understanding of the connection from those shops to Botanical Road, the principal value there that I understand in that is that we're actually taking what is currently an on-road facility and feels quite risky, even for an experienced cyclist, into an off-road facility, which makes it a very welcoming space for families, for young users, for old users. It's a shame that Councillor Findlay isn't in the chamber. I could make mentions particularly of elderly people and people on scooters. It would just make it simply a facility that would be useful for everyone from 8 to 80 and all those sort of age brackets if we can move it off-road. And that is the huge value here, is actually getting an extension of the off-road component from that part of the city, really connecting all the way out to Longburn. And for those of you that are familiar with our planning aspirations out there, we're not only talking then about serving Awapuni, Highbury, we're talking about Kakatangata and thousands of new houses and tens of thousands of new residents over time. So it's essential that we do have a high quality link here, and this very much creates that. So I'd urge you to support option 1 as proposed. It's consistent with all of our strategic planning. And is a actually quite simple and straightforward solution. It's been quite humorous to me, kind of reflecting on the amount of debate that we've had kind of over 3 different transport items now at increasingly granular levels, and the amount of time that we've invested at those levels. I think my main advice around how we go about perhaps, thinking about things like how high a separator should be, what color it might be, what it's made out of, how often we replace it, is that we might leave that to the experts on the understanding that eventually people will need to learn how to drive with their eyes open.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I am happy to support completing the treatment. However, I do have some reservations about the 300,000 being spent on that crossing, which is not far, as has been pointed out, to the Botanical Road Pioneer Highway, where I do believe you could get across at that point to the off-road option that's just been talked about by Councillor Barrett. So I won't be supporting this this recommendation. I don't think it, at the moment, 300, option 1 includes 300,000 of budget 2121, which is footpath improvements being used for that crossing. I think the feedback that I hear from residents is that footpaths is really important and that investment needs to go into that. I'm a bit hesitant about 300,000 of that budget being used in this way, where there is another option just down the road to be able to cross at a signalised crossing, so that is a safe way to get across there. So I won't be supporting this one. And we'll support option 2 if it's proposed as an alternate.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be fairly brief on this. Chris, thank you for the report, and in particular, I think your arguments around the crossing point away from Botanical Road is absolutely appropriate. That actually de-risks that particular part of the roadway, carriageway, because you'll go from 2-way traffic to 4-way traffic at that point, so it adds elements of risk. The other point is that this cycleway has always been incomplete, hence relatively low numbers of people actually using it. So we can use numbers of cyclists to justify to either do or not do once that is complete. So I'm going to support the current recommendation that's before us. Thank you.
Any other speakers for or against? Then we'll move to right reply. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just to address some of the points that were raised. The first one is that option 2 is not in keeping with our strategic plan. We've consulted on the Urban Cycleway Master Plan. We have agreed what the priority cycle routes will be with the public, and we have used this temporary treatment as a way of gauging what worked well and what didn't work well for this cycleway. And I have to say that as a cyclist that uses Pioneer Highway on a regular basis, that it is not safe to cycle on the road from the section between West Street and Botanical Road heading out of town. And there are a number of reasons for that. The first one is that there are too many exits and entries across the cycleway. So there's a gas station, there's an in and out to the new housing complex that Soho built, and there's also a shop. The cycleway itself is narrow. With parking on the road, it's too narrow for you to actually cycle next to a parked car without risking getting knocked off your bike by an opening door. And I, since we're resorting to anecdotal evidence, I would just like to report that every single time that I cycle along that cycleway, I have a near miss between West Street and Botanical Road. Every single time. People coming out of West Street shops, not looking, crossing the cycleway. People coming out of the gas station, not looking, crossing the cycleway. People getting into their cars outside the little bakery there, not looking, pulling out in front of a cyclist. So that aspect of it is not safe. And I really do take issue with the members that say that paint on the road is a cycleway. Paint on the road is not a safe cycleway. If it was, we'd have people using the cycleways. The whole idea of the urban master plan for cycleways is to prioritise cycle routes and to make those routes safe. What is safe is a separated, preferably off-road cycleway, and that's what we're proposing here. And in terms of the crossing isn't just for cyclists. A lot of people use the shops at West Street, and at the moment they're having to negotiate 4 lanes of traffic to cross that road. And so it would be an advantage to pedestrians as well as cyclists to have the crossing there. So, I mean, just in conclusion, I would say that we need to be consistent with our decision-making, where we've gone out and consulted on an urban cycleway master plan, where we've agreed what the prioritised cycle routes are, where we've gone through the process of having temporary treatments to figure out what works and what doesn't. For us to, refuse the last fence just seems ridiculous to me. And so I really would like us to at least get this project finished, to provide people with a safe and effective route to cycle into town from Longburn, connects up our villages, and let's see what the counts are like then. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to a vote. That has passed, 9 votes in favour and 4 votes against. We'll get them emailed out. All right. I believe we only have one item left. We're almost there. That's our item 10, our work schedule. Do we just straight vote on this? All right, I'll move that work schedule. I'll look to a seconder, Councillor Hancock. We don't have any comments. Any comments? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question through you to the Chief Planning Officer. I'm just reflecting on the conversation we were having earlier where the Mayor commented on sector profiles with CEDA. Noting item 25 on the list is that full range of sector profiles which don't seem to have any instruction that sits with them. So they're not from terms of reference, they're not from council instruction. I'm wondering if there's still a need to progress those pieces of work.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Good question. I was going to provide a comment on those. They've deliberately got TBC. We heard the questions and comments earlier in relation to the sector profiles, and as the Chief Economist, Stacey Bell, said, we're having a bit of a fresh think about the way in which we do those. That may well result in a report back to this committee about a way forward in terms of the way we address those, but also the way in which we work with other organisations. So, yeah, so there's no active work on these. Obviously, we're monitoring the data in these areas, but we're having a fresh think and we'll report back on the way in which we address those.
So would it be appropriate to capture that in the work schedule, to request a report back on how we approach sector profile work, rather than expecting the sector profiles themselves?
Yes, I'm happy for that change to be made. I just have to obviously check in with Stacey and Julie in terms of what an appropriate date would be for that work.
All right, thank you. That's exceeded our list of people wishing to make comments, so we will vote.
That's a funny turn of phrase.
And that has passed, 13 votes in favour and none against. That brings us to the end of our first committee meeting for the year. Thank you all for bearing with me through this process, and I'd like us to finish with karakia. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. Kia tau te manaaki wairua ki rungi a tātou I tēnei rā hāmini.